India is home to over 200 million Muslims and more than 1 billion Hindus. They coexist, for the most part, peacefully in the same cities, the same neighborhoods, sometimes the same families. But every few years that peace breaks, riots, burn buildings, curfews, and each time it happens, the same question resurfaces. Where does this tension actually come from? The honest answer isn't simple. Historians don't fully agree on it. Some trace it back centuries, others say it's a modern invention. Today we're going to walk through the evidence, not to pick a side, but to understand how a conflict this old got this complicated. Islam arrived in South Asia gradually, beginning around the 8th century through trade and later expanding over centuries under Muslim-ruled kingdoms, most notably the Mughal Empire, which governed much of India from the 1500s to the 1700s. For much of that period, coexistence was common. Mughal emperors like Akbar promoted religious tolerance, married into Hindu royal families, and included Hindus in his administration. But it wasn't uniform. Some recent research analyzing centuries of recorded conflicts between Hindu and Muslim political powers found that hostility measurably increased starting around 1700. This increase was notable under Emperor Aurangzeb, who reversed many of his predecessors' tolerant policies, reimposed attacks specifically on non-Muslims, and destroyed some Hindu temples. This triggered organized resistance, most famously from the Marathas, a Hindu warrior confederation that explicitly used religious identity to unite their rebellion against Mughal rule. This matters because it complicates a popular assumption that Hindu and Muslim conflict is purely a colonial invention. Some scholars argue the seeds were planted well before the British ever arrived. That said, almost every historian agrees the British colonial period dramatically escalated the divide, even if they disagree on whether it created it. 3 colonial policies stand out. First, the 1871 census. For the first time, every Indian was required to officially register a single religious identity. This turned religion from a lived, often fluid identity into a fixed political category, and crucially into a number. Once you can count a population by religion, you can start allocating political power by religion too. Second, separate electorates introduced in 1909. Muslims and Hindus began voting for separate representatives in separate constituencies. Instead of building shared political interests, this pushed community leaders to compete for power as Hindus or as Muslims, turning religious identity into the basis of political strategy. Third, the classic colonial strategy historians call divide and rule. A colonial power governing hundreds of millions of people with a relatively small administration benefits when the population is divided against itself rather than united against the colonizer. Whether this was always deliberate policy or sometimes just administrative convenience is still debated, but the effect was the same. Religious identity became political currency. By the 1930s and 40s, 2 major political parties had emerged largely along these lines, the Congress Party and the Muslim League. The Muslim League began pushing for a separate Muslim majority state. That push led to partition, the splitting of British India into 2 independent nations, India and Pakistan. It remains one of the largest mass migrations in human history. An estimated 10 to 20 million people crossed the new border in a matter of months. Muslims moved toward Pakistan, while Hindus and Sikhs moved toward India. The violence that accompanied it was staggering. Estimates of the death toll range from several 100,000 to over 1 million people in communal massacres, revenge killings, and mass sexual violence on both sides. Partition did not resolve Hindu and Muslim tension. In some ways, it hardened that tension. Muslims who remained in India, about 1/3 of the subcontinent's Muslim population, were sometimes viewed with suspicion. They were blamed by some for the country's division, even though most had no role in the political decisions that caused it. Meanwhile, the new rivalry between India and Pakistan gave the old religious divide a permanent geopolitical dimension. Since 1947, communal riots have continued in waves, not as a single continuous conflict, but as periodic outbreaks. They are often triggered by local disputes that escalate rapidly. Common triggers include a religious procession passing a mosque during prayer time. Other triggers are rumors, property disputes, or elections. The most significant single flashpoint came in 1992 at a site in the city of Ayodhya. A 16th century mosque, the Babri Masjid, stood on land that Hindu nationalist groups claimed was the birthplace of the deity Ram. They also claimed it was the site of a temple the Mughals had allegedly destroyed to build the mosque. Many contemporary scholars argue that today's tensions are less about ancient religious hatred and more about modern political strategy, specifically the rise of Hindu nationalism or Hindutva. Hindutva is a political ideology, not a religious one. It frames Hindus as India's rightful cultural majority and sometimes casts religious minorities, particularly Muslims, as a threat to that identity. Critics argue this ideology has at times been used to mobilize votes by deliberately inflaming communal tension. Supporters argue it responds to what they see as decades of the political establishment overlooking Hindu majority interests in the name of secularism. Social media can spread rumors and inflammatory content faster than they can be verified or corrected. Persistent socioeconomic gaps mean Indian Muslims, on average, report lower education and income levels than the national average, which can deepen resentment on multiple sides. So what actually causes Hindu-Muslim conflict in India? The honest answer is no single cause. Pre-colonial power struggles, colonial policies that turned identity into political currency, and a partition that never fully healed. Unresolved disputes over sacred land and modern political incentives keep old wounds open. It's tempting to reduce a story like this to a good side and a bad side. The historical record doesn't really allow for that. What it shows instead is something more uncomfortable, that conflict like this isn't inherited, it's maintained by policy, by politics, by choices made again and again by people who benefit from division, understanding that history doesn't resolve it, but it's the first step to not repeating it blindly. If you enjoyed this, hit subscribe. I'm digging up something new from history's archives every week that you probably never learned in school. Drop a comment with a topic you want covered next, and I'll see you in the next one.